Masechet Sanhedrin Daf Lamed Gimel. Dineh Mamonot Machazirin. And the Mishnah said that for monetary cases, if the judges decided the case, gave a verdict, and then some new evidence came out, or they realized they made a mistake, or someone pointed out a new argument, and they have to overturn the verdict, then it depends. If it's a monetary case, then we change the verdict both ways. Whether he said guilty and now it's going to be innocent, or he said innocent and now it's going to be guilty. Because if one person is paying money to someone else, then he's losing and the other person is gaining. And if we said he doesn't have to pay, then the plaintiff loses out because he didn't get his money. So we're going to change it either way. However, in a capital case, we only change from guilt to innocence. If at first they said he's guilty, but they didn't actually kill him yet in the court, and someone comes up with some new argument, or they realize a mistake, then they bring him back and they say, you know what, innocent, we made a mistake, and he's free to go. However, if they at first give a verdict that said he is innocent, and then they find out later that he was actually guilty, there's no double jeopardy for guilt. That's what our Mishnah said. What minhu? And now we bring a Mishnah from Masechet Bechorot. That seems to contradict this. That one says, Danet adin, zikat achayab, chiyebet hazakai, timet hatahor, tihedet hatameh, ma she'asa asui, vishalem mi beto. If a judge judges a case and someone was really guilty, but he said you're innocent, or he was really innocent and then he said you're guilty, or if something was actually tahor and the judge says this is tameh, and then it was not usable, let's say it's turuma or something, or it was actually tameh and the judge said it's tahor. We'll see how that could lead to a monetary loss. What the judgment is final, the case is closed. We don't open it up again. If the defendant paid the plaintiff keeps the money. Or what about the defendant? He didn't really have to pay. So you know what happens? The judge pays from his house. The judge has to pay out of his own pocket for his mistake to make the defendant whole. But we don't reopen the case. If someone was paid, they keep that money. So we have a contradiction here. Our Mishnah says when there is a mistake in a monetary case, then we reopen it. And the judge wouldn't have to pay, because if you reopen the case, then the whoever paid will get the money back. And so obviously the judge doesn't have to then also pay. So the Mishnah said that we reopen the case. That's our Mishnah in Sanhedrin. The Mishnah in Masechet Bechorot said, case closed, and the judge pays. So how do we deal with this contradiction? We're going to see several possible resolutions. Amar Rav Yosef lakashya, kan b'mumche, kan b'she'eno mumche. Rav Yosef explains, there is no contradiction. The Mishnah in Bechorot is talking about an expert judge. If it's an expert judge, then the case is closed. We leave the verdict as is. And our Mishnah, Masechet Sanhedrin, is talking about a lay judge. He didn't really know the law. And so if he makes a mistake, then that verdict is null and void, and we reopen the case. Okay, that's one answer, but we challenge this answer. Are you telling me that if he's an expert, then he has to pay from his own pocket? But the Mishnah in Masechet Bechorot continues and says, if he was an expert, then he does not have to pay. So we see that Mishnah itself, here's the beginning of the Mishnah, that if he made a mistake, then the verdict is final and he pays from his pocket. That's talking about a lay person. He pays from his pocket. If he's an expert judge, then he does not pay from his pocket, and we also do not reopen the case. It's just a loss, right? Sometimes you make a mistake, and that's it. It's a loss. So we see that this distinction does not work because the distinction between a layperson and an expert is already built in to the Mishnah in Bechorot. So it's not about whether he pays or not. What we want to solve is whether you reopen the case or not. Our Mishnah in Sanhedrin says you reopen the case, and the Mishnah Bechorot says case closed. Whether the judge pays or not is dependent on whether he's a layperson or an expert. An expert does not pay. So that answer is challenged, so we go to a second answer, Amar Rav Nachman. Kan sheyesh gadol hemenu bechokma ubeminyan, kan she'en gadol mimen hemenu bechokma ubeminyan. When there is a greater court, that's what our Mishnah here in Sanhedrin is talking about. Because there's a greater court, like an appeals court, which is a higher level. If it's greater in wisdom and in number, there's more judges on that court, and they're greater in wisdom, then we reopen the case because now you have an appeals court that will look at the lower court and say, oh, there's a mistake here. They will reopen the case and issue a new verdict. That's our Mishnah. The Mishnah in Bechorot is talking about a case where there is no higher court, at least not around here. And so there's no one else to go to. And so if there's no higher court, there's no appeals court, then whatever the court said is final, even though they may realize after that there was a problem. But if there's no higher court, then we don't reopen the case. Okay, third answer. Rav Sheshat amar kan sheta'ab b'dvar Mishnah. Kan sheta'ab b'shikol hada'at. Amar Rav Sheshat amar Rav Aseh. Ta'ab b'dvar Mishnah chozer. Ta'ab b'shikol hada'at eno chozer. Rav Sheshat says, if they made a mistake regarding the Mishnah, meaning a halacha. The halacha is declared, it was already set to be A, and then this court said B. That is a glaring mistake that does not stand. It's a false verdict, right? They said, the halacha says this case is chayav. They said patur. What? Patur based on what? It's a clear halacha. So in that kind of case, that's what our Mishnah here in Sanhedrin is talking about, and we reopen the case. Whereas, if it's a mistake in judgment, there's no clear halacha, it's just a judgment call. Should it go this way? It could go that way. In that case, you leave it alone. You don't reopen the case, even though the judgment really seems one way and they went the other way, but wasn't a clear-cut halacha. And that's what Rav Sheshat said in the name of Rav Aseh, that in general, a judge who makes a mistake regarding the halacha, then we have to reopen the case. It's invalid, what he said the first time. But if it's about deliberation, about judgment, a reason, then the case that verdict is final. Amar leRavina leRav Asher, afilu ta'a b'Rabbi Chiya v'Rabbi Oshaya. Now Ravina is asking Rav Asher the extent to which we call something ta'a b'dvar Mishnah. When we say something is a final halacha, how authoritative does it need to be called a halacha? So certainly, let's say it's from the time of Hillel. Okay, for sure, if someone goes like Bet Shammai rather than Bet Hillel, then for sure that would be Ta'ab Devar Mishnah. Okay, that would be an easy case. But he's asking a harder case. What about Rabbi Chiya and Rabbi Oshaya? They are the last generation of Tanaim. So they're still Tanaim, but already like the last generation. Transitioning into the Amoraim. If someone says halacha is like Rabbi Chiya in some matter, and then a judge goes against it, would that be a mistaken halacha? Amar le'in, he says yes, right? Because Rabbi Chiya, he's still a great Tana, even though he's the last generation. How about afilu b'Rav Ushmuel? Ravina asks, what about Rav and Shmuel, who are first generation Amoraim? So maybe you'll think that they're not as authoritative as Tanaim. And if someone decides halacha that should be like Shmuel, but he decides it against Shmuel, so maybe you'll say that's not called a halacha. That's not a mistake in the Mishnah. What do you think about that? Hamar le'in, that is also called a mistake. Even though they are Amoraim, they're very important, very authoritative. Afilu b'didiu v'didach, and then Ravina asks Rav Asher, what about me and you? Ravina and Rav Asher were the sixth generation Amoraim, all the way towards the end of the Amoraic period. And so maybe you'll think that we are much less authoritative. And if someone says halacha is like Rav Asher, it's been decided halacha is like Rav Asher, and then some judge decides against it. There, would you say that's a mistaken halacha? Or maybe not. Just going against Rav Asher is like a contemporary compared to Ravina here. Amarle atu anan katli kane bagma anan. And Rav Asher says a funny line. What are we, just reed cutters in the pond? We would say today, what do we, chop liver? What do you think we're just doing? We're just having fun all day, just doing this a menial job of cutting reeds. We're doing very important things, right? These are the sages, the greatest sages of their generation. So yes, even us, even if someone says halacha is like Ravina, that's been decided as halacha, and someone who goes against it, then that's ta'ab b'dvar Mishnah, and it's null and void, and you reopen the case. Good. Now what would be an example of an error of reason? Amar Rav Papa, kegon tere tana'e o tere amora'e, de pligi hadadeh, velai temar hilcheta lo kemar, velo kemar, For example, the Papa says, I'll say there's two Tanaim or two Amoraim that are arguing with each other. And it was never declared the halacha is like this or like that or like this master or like that master. The sages never voted on it, never declared one halacha. So now the options are open. V'ikre ve'da'abad kechad minayhu v'sugya deshma'ata azle ki'idach. Hainu shikul hadat. This is a very important statement here. And it says, if a judge will follow the Tana A or Amora A. However, the flow of the discussion really follows the other one. That would be a mistake in shikul hadat, in reason. What you learn from here is that when we learn a sugya, sometimes the sugya ends and says, this person is refuted, or the halacha is like that person. And then it's pretty clear which one it is. Or certainly if it says the rabbis, nimnu v'gamaru, they voted and decided. But we don't have too many of those. Usually a sugya has a discussion, asks some questions this way, answers some questions, right? Goes back and forth in different ways. It's not always so clear what the bottom line should be. What a Papa is saying here is that one has to look at a sugya very carefully to see which way is the flow of the argument pushing towards. And that's what the halacha is supposed to be. And if you look at it carefully, usually you can see, look, they're asking a lot of questions on this side, and even though they're answering them, but the answers are dachuk, they have to give a limitation in okimta. It's not the reason, like you can answer it, but it's difficult. And if you have so many difficult answers, then that means the sugya is pushing you to follow the halacha in the other direction. So if you have a case like that, where the rabbis never decided clearly halakha is like this, but the flow of the sugya seems like it should be A, and the judge says B instead. So he didn't go against a mishnah. You can't call that a clear-cut error, but it is a mistake in reasoning because he should have realized that the reasoning, the flow of the logic is pointing one way, and he followed the other way. But you don't overturn a verdict based on that because it was not clear-cut, it's only based on more subtle reason. Good. Rav Hamnuna le Rav Sheshat. And now we have a challenge against Rav Sheshat, who said that if one makes a mistake in Devar Mishnah, then you overturn it. So now we're going to see an interesting story, and based on the story, we are going to challenge him. Here's the story. Ma'aseh bepara shel bet Menachem shenitela ha'em shela ve'echila Rabbi Tarfon la'kelabim. One time there was a cow of the household of Menachem, and this cow had its womb was removed. It had some surgery, had some problem, and so it didn't have a womb. And the question that came to the Bitarfon is this kosher or not? Is it a terefa? If it will die within 12 months because it's missing this organ, then it's taref. A person can't eat it. And so to be tarfon, he decided it's taref, it's a terefa, and an animal cannot live without a womb for 12 months. And therefore, he told the person who asked him, you can feed it to the dogs. Okay, you're allowed to feed it to the dogs, but you can't eat it yourself. So this was a significant loss of a whole cow to this person of Bet Menachem. And then later on, the incident came under discussion to the sages in Yavne. They heard about this, and they said, actually, it's permitted. Shamar todos harofe en para bechazira yoset me'Alexandria shel Mitzrayim ela im ken hotchin ha'em shela kedei shelo teled, because they heard from Theodosius, the doctor. He was a very famous doctor that the rabbis consulted when they needed to know something about anatomy or a medicine, and he told them that in Alexandria, in Egypt, they grow cows and pigs that are select, and they sell them. But they don't want the people that buy them to reproduce them. It's because they want to have a monopoly on it. And so therefore, what they do in Alexandria is they remove the womb from these cows and these pigs so that it will not give birth, and the person that buys them won't be able to breed them. Okay, brilliant. The point of the story is that you see that they do this, and it does not harm the health of the animal, because otherwise people wouldn't want to buy it. So they know how to do this surgery and remove the womb, and it survives and is healthy. Therefore, actually, this animal is kosher. Rabbi Tarfon made a mistake, and he should have told her, it's kosher, it's not a terefa. Amar Rabbi Tarfon, halcha chamorecha Tarfon. And so Rabbi Tarfon said about himself, oh, your animal is gone. In other words, Rabbi Tarfon, his donkey is gone. Meaning he thought that he's going to have to pay for the cow that he said was not kosher. Now he made a mistake. He's going to have to pay out of his pocket, out of his own pocket, and he's going to have to give whatever, a donkey, whatever the value of the cow was. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, patur ata shekol hamomche l'rabim patur mileshalem. Rabbi Akiva said, no, Rabbi Tarfon, you don't have to pay. You are an expert to the public. You've been accepted as an expert judge, and an expert judge does not have to pay, even if he makes a mistake, and therefore you don't have to pay. That's the story. Now let's analyze. If Rav Sheshat is right, that someone who makes a mistake about a Mishnah, we reopen the case, then we should say, then Rabbi Akiva should have told Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Tarfon, you made a mistake in a Mishnah. There's actually a Mishnah in Masechet Cholin that said that if the womb has been removed from an animal, it's still kosher. So actually, it's a clear-cut Mishnah. And if someone makes a mistake, if a judge makes a mistake in the Dvar Mishnah, we reopen the case. So Rabbi Tarfon, don't worry, you're not going to have to pay out of pocket. A judge, any judge, a lay judge, would only have to pay out of pocket if the verdict is final, and then he has to compensate. But if we reopen the case because the original verdict was null and void, then the judge will not have to pay. So if Rav Sheshat is correct that To'eb Devar Mishnah, we reopen the case, then Rabbi Akiva should have said to Rabbi Tarfon that he doesn't have to pay because it's ta'ah b'devar mishnah, but he didn't say that. He said because you are mumche. So we see that this is a challenge against Rav Sheshat. And we answer, Chada ve'od ka'amar, Chada de to'eh b'devar mishnah ata, ve'to'eh b'devar mishnah chozer, ve'od, ina me b'shikol adat ta'ita, mumche l'rabim ata, ve'chol mumche l'rabim patur mileshalem. No, in fact, Rabbi Akiva could have answered that, but there's two things he could have said. So it's really one answer, number one, it's one answer plus another one. The first response that Rabbi Akiva gave or could have given is, listen, first of all, you made a mistake regarding a clear-cut halacha. It's in the Mishnah. And in such a case, we reopen the case and give a new verdict. So your verdict was null and void, so you don't have to pay out of pocket. And furthermore, even if it was a mistake in reason, and usually a mistake in reason, the case is closed, you are an expert, and anyone who's an expert does not have to pay. So really, there's two answers that Rabbi Akiva could have given, and he gave one, but really the other one applies also. So there's no challenge against Rav Sheshat. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak leRava, Mai kamotiv Rav Hamnuna leRav Sheshat mipara. Para hare chilah lekelabim veleta de tihadar. Now, another question about that story. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak asks Rava, what is the challenge that Rav Hamnuna asked Rav Sheshat from the case of the cow? After all, the cow was already eaten by the dogs, and so it's not possible to reopen the case and say, oh, you know what, you said the cow was not kosher, but really it's kosher, so change the verdict, okay, give back the cow. There is no cow. So what are you asking about here? The question was, oh, this is ta'ut b'davar mishnah. Since it's ta'ut b'davar mishnah, so Rabbi Akiva should have said, oh, you made a mistake in the davar mishnah. Oh, you reopen the case. How could you reopen the case here when the cow is gone? So you can't do it. It's lost. And so you can't reopen the case and say, oh, you know what, the cow is kosher. How's that going to help anybody? And Rava explains that the question of Ramnana was a good question, because you can explain it as follows. If you say that a judge who makes a mistake regarding a Mishnah, you do not reopen the case. That would be against Rav Sheshat. Then this story would make sense. Alma kamdina, the case is closed, the verdict stands. Hainu dekam afchid Rabbi Tarfon, and that's what Rabbi Tarfon was afraid. Since the case is closed and he made a mistake, he said, I'm going to have to pay from my pocket. And then Rabbi Akiva told them, no, you're an expert judge and you don't have to pay. So you see, it would read smoothly if we didn't follow Rav Sheshat and we said, Torah b'davar Mishnah does not reopen it. Ela i'amar Torah b'davar Mishnah chozer le'maleh kevan de'ilu havai para dincha lav dina velo kilum abadet hashtanameh lo kilum abad. However, if you say that according to Rav Sheshat, if you follow Rav Sheshat, that someone who makes a mistake regarding a Mishnah, regarding a halacha, then you do reopen the case. We're explaining the question that Rav Hamnuna asked Rav Sheshat, that if so, then the Rabbi Akiva should have said, instead of saying you're an expert and therefore you don't have to pay, he should have said, since if the cow was still alive, then we would certainly reopen the case because your judgment is not a judgment. A judgment that's based on an error is not a judgment at all. It's just like saying nonsense, right? If a judge just goes and says nonsense, something totally against the Torah, we don't even call that a judgment. So he certainly would not have to pay. And since if the cow was alive, certainly we would reopen the case. Now that it has been eaten and is dead, still the same thing is true. You did nothing by issuing a verdict that was totally against the Mishnah. It's like you did nothing. And it's too bad that the cow is gone. It will be a loss to the owner of the cow, it's true, but you did no legal action, and therefore you are not going to be responsible. That's what Rabbi Akiva should have said, and then the answer would be, as we said before, that it really, yes, indeed, Rabbi Akiva could have said that, and he had another answer, so he had two answers, and the story only records one. But in any case, now we explained the question properly. Okay, now we have yet another answer back to the original question. Our Mishnah says that when there is a mistake or new information, we reopen the case in a monetary case. Whereas the Mishnah Bechorot says, case closed, and the judge will pay from his pocket if he's a lay judge. So we have a contradiction. Another answer. Rav Chisda amar kan shenatal v'natan beyad. Kan shelo natal v'natan beyad. The Mishnah in Bechorot that says the case is closed, that's talking about a case where the judge himself took the money from the defendant and held it in his hand and gave it to the plaintiff. By physically taking the money and giving it to the plaintiff, he made himself personally responsible because he's the one that took it. So the plaintiff says, you took my money from me wrongly. Oh, yeah, I did. Because, right, the plaintiff didn't give it to the defendant directly. So because you took it wrongly, therefore the case stands and the judge has to pay himself. However, our Mishnah, Masechet Sanhedrin, is where the judge did not do so. The judge said words. The judge told the plaintiff, oh, you have to give the defendant $100, and he gave it directly $100. So he did not get personally involved. He made an error. Okay, so then the defendant has to give the $100 back to the plaintiff. And so that's what we're talking about, whether the judge was personally took the money or only ordered the money to be given over. Now, that answer of Rav Chisda makes sense if he was really innocent and the judge said you're guilty. So the judge at first said you're guilty, and then he took money from the plaintiff and gave it to the defendant. Okay, so that's how he put his hands on it. But what about the other way around? If the judge originally said you're innocent, he told the defendant you don't have to pay anything. So then no money changed hands, and then he realized afterwards, oh, actually you have to pay. So then there was no taking money by the judge and giving it. Because there was no exchange of money at all. So then what would be the case in Masechet Bechorot, where there was some kind of change of hands, that the judge took money and gave money, if he originally said innocent? And the answer is Damale Paturata. Because he said you don't have to pay. Okay, but still saying that you're exempt from payment is not taking money and giving money. And the answer is Kevan Paturata Kemo Shenatal Venatal Beyadameh. By saying you are exempt from paying, it's the same as if he actually took money the money that the plaintiff said, you owe me, and it's as if he took that money and gave it to the defendant, even though actually there's no change of hands. But when the plaintiff brings a suit, so by bringing a suit, he say, you owe me, and it's like the plaintiff is about to get the money. And then by saying you don't have to pay, so it's as if you're taking the money, even though actually no money changed hands. So we consider it as if, and therefore, if he made a mistake, then the judge will have to pay out of pocket and give the money to the plaintiff in that case, because originally said that the defendant doesn't have to pay, but really the plaintiff was owed the money, the judge will have to pay out of pocket. Okay, that's the answer. A follow-up on that answer. Ela matnitin. Now, how are you going to go back and explain our Mishnah in Sanhedrin? The Katane. Dine mamonot machzirin ben lizchut ben lechova. Our Mishnah says that if a judge makes a mistake in a monetary case, then we change the verdict both ways. I could understand if he for exemption. That would be if originally said you have to pay, and he just said you have to pay. He didn't actually take the money himself, the judge. He just ordered it. And the plaintiff gave $100 to the defendant, and then we realized the mistake. So our Mishnah is a case that he did not touch the money, and therefore he orders it to go back. In that case, he does not have to pay out of pocket. Instead, we reopen the case. But the question is, how can you have a case in our Mishnah Sanhedrin that originally said you don't have to pay, and then he said actually you have to pay. So originally he said you're exempt. The answer to the previous question, you just said that if a judge says you are exempt from paying, it's as if he took the money from the defendant, from the plaintiff, and gave it to the defendant. It's the same thing by saying you don't have to pay, because he thought he was going to have to pay. The plaintiff thought he was going to get money. By saying you don't have to pay, it's the same thing as if he took it. If it's the same thing as if he took it, then he should have to pay out of pocket. So what case could the Mishnah be talking about where he says at first patur, and yet we reopen the case and it's not like he took the money in his hand? And so the answer is as follows. Chadakatane. This is a confusing way of reading the Mishnah, but let's try. So really the Mishnah is only teaching one case. You're right, indeed, it only works one way. And you have to read the Mishnah like this. Regarding monetary law, we only reopen the case and change the verdict if it was originally, he said you're guilty and the person paid, and then we're changing to exemption, which would be a chovah, it would be a liability to the other side. Because if originally he said the defendant has to pay the plaintiff, and then he says, oh, you know what, I made a mistake, well then the plaintiff is going to lose out because he has to give back the money. That's where, if he didn't touch the money, then we reopen the verdict and he still have to pay the money back. It only works that way. That's it. So when the Mishnah says ben lizchut ben lechovah, we're reinterpreting it to be machzin lizchut shehi chovah. We have to kind of change the words. We're going to ask in a second. The Mishnah doesn't say that. It says ben lizchut ben lechovah, but go with it for now. Dechevata gabe nefashot machazirin lizchut ve'en machazirin lechovah. Now the next part of the Mishnah that says, that compares it to capital case. And it says this would be in parallel to a capital case where we change for innocence, but we don't change for guilt, right? That's exactly what we said for a capital case. So we have to interpret that the same way. So this is a challenge, because if you're going to interpret the Resha regarding a monetary case in this way, then you're going to have to interpret the Sefa also in that way. So how are you going to interpret the Sefa? You're going to have to say, Machazirin l'zchut, zchut geredetam. That we change for innocence, that is simple innocence, meaning the guy he violated Shabbat or whatever, and he was declared guilty, capital punishment, and then, we realized a mistake, and so now he's acquitted. That is an acquittal that has no effect on anybody else, and that's what we would do. But the continuation has to be in parallel to the first one, that there's a case that we do not do. So when do we not change the verdict, even in a capital punishment? When he was declared innocent and now he's going to be declared guilty, if it's a case where that guilt would cause liability to someone else. That's how you explained it in the first half, right? That it's innocence that would cause liability to someone else. So here also, if changing the judgment from guilt to innocence will cause, in a capital case, will cause liability to someone else, then we will not change it. Now, what are you talking about? Chovtei deman. Who else is there? In a capital case, usually it's this guy. Are you going to kill him or not? It's not like a payment where if one guy gets the money, the other loses. If he does, that guy gets the money, the other guy loses. So what are you talking about? We're talking about the loss to the Goel Adam, the blood redeemer, in cases where a relative of the deceased has a right to go and take the law into his own hands and kill the murderer. If you say that he was guilty, then okay, good. The murderer, the Goel Adam, can go after him. And now, if you're going to change to innocence, then the Goel Adam will not be able to anymore. He has a loss of his right. And so, if it's zechut, plain old zechut that no one else loses, then you're going to change from innocence to guilt. But if it's going to cause a loss to somebody else, then we will not change it. That would be a case where it would cause a loss to Goel Adam. Okay, if you're bothered by this, don't worry, so is the Gemara. What are you saying? Because of the loss to the Goel Adam, you're going to kill this person? You just realized that you made a mistake. At first you said this guy is guilty. Then some new information came to light, and now you say he's innocent. And now you're going to tell me, oh, but you know what? If it's going to cause a loss to Goel Adam, he really wants to kill someone, so we should let him. We should not overturn it. You can't do that. So this doesn't make sense. Ve'od my ben kashya. And also the Mishnah says in a monetary case you change it ben lezchut ben lechova. So that's the language. It doesn't say machazrin lezchut shehi chova. And so you cannot fit this language in. And so therefore we have to come up with a new answer, which is this. Ravina Amar kegon shaya lo biyado mashkon un talo mimenu. So Rava explains how you can have a case where the judge puts his hands on something and physically takes and gives something, even when he first said patur, and then he realized he was a mistake and says chayav. For example, if the plaintiff had a collateral in his possession. Let's say he's a lender, and he comes to the bar and says, hey, you owe me $100. And he's holding a watch as collateral. So then it goes to the judge, and the judge at first says, the defendant does not have to pay. Right? There was no loan, or he paid already, whatever the reason. He says, you don't have to pay the $100. And you have a collateral. The judge goes and takes the collateral from the plaintiff and gives it to the defendant. So, and then he realized he made a mistake, and really he did have to pay. Now, that's the case of our Mishnah in Masechet Sanhedrin, where the judge has to pay out of pocket when he first said patur and then said chayav, because he in fact did take something away and give something. So you can have a simple case of the judge taking and giving something both ways, both if he said chayav and then patur, or if he said patur and then realized it was chayav. And now we go back to the Mishnah in Bechorot. They gave another couple of examples. We want to explain how those work. Timet tahor dagei be'sheretz says if the judge said that this produce is tameh and then turned out to be tahor, how would that cause a loss? Well, it could cause a loss if the judge said at first, listen, this is tameh, and to emphasize his ruling, he said, go take a sheretz and touch the sheretz to the produce. And so he it was tahor. He realizes after he made a mistake that it was tahor, and he made it tameh. And now that it's tameh, it's worth less than it being tahor. It's less usable for certain things. And so because he caused it a loss, and then the judge, in the case of Bechorot, would have to pay out of pocket if he's a layperson. And the last case in Bechorot is Tiheret HaTameh Sherban Ben Perotav. These produce was really tameh. The judge said it's tahor at first. Okay, he said it's tahor, and then the owner took it and mixed it in with his other tahor produce, thinking that is tahor. Then the judge realized his mistake. He says, actually it was tameh. So where's the loss? It was tameh anyway, because he mixed it in with all the rest of the produce, and now that whole mixture is going to be tameh, because it all got mixed together. And so he caused a loss of all of the rest of the produce, and so that's the cases that the Mishnah in Bechorot is talking about, where we do not overturn the verdict, and if the judge is a lay judge, he will have to pay out of pocket. Now back to the Mishnah that says, in a capital case, if the judge originally found him guilty before they killed him, some new information came to light, and we found out that he's innocent, then certainly we bring him back to court and we say, oh, sorry, you're innocent, and he goes free. The other way around, if he was innocent, and then that was the verdict, and then we found some information that says really he's guilty, we do not bring him back. No double jeopardy. Now we're going to find a source for this. Tenor Rabbanan, minayin le'oseh mibet din chayav, amar echad yesh li lelamed alav zechut, minayin shemachzirin oto, tamud lomar, naki al taharog. Braita says, how do you know that if someone left the bet din and he was guilty, and then someone says, wait, I have an argument on his behalf for acquittal, how do you know that we bring him back to court to hear that argument? Because the pasuk says, an innocent person you shall not kill. There's a pasuk in Shemot that actually says, V'naki v'sadik al taharog. We're going to see the sadik part. So we're reading naki part and sadik part separately. So even though the pasuk says naki v'sadik, so just looking at the naki, really this person is innocent, because now we have no information, so we can't kill him, so we bring him back. Zakai, ואמר אחד יש לי ללמד עליו חובה מניין שאין מחזירין אותו, תלמוד לומר צדיק אל תהרוג. And how about someone who was declared innocent at first, and then someone says, wait, I have an argument for guilt. How do you know that you do not bring him back to court? Because of the other word in that pasuk says sadiq. Sadiq here doesn't mean that he is actually righteous. In fact, this person sounds like he is guilty, but it's sadiq in the sense that he was declared to be innocent. So since he was declared to be innocent, now we don't kill him anymore, even though there's new information. But that's it. We're going to try to be lenient, and we're not going to bring him back to be guilty. Amarav Shimi bar Asher v'chidufa lamesit dichtib lo tachmov lo techaseh alav. Rav Shimi bar Asher says we do the opposite for someone who is accused of inciting people to idol worship, because the pasuk says, do not spare, do not conceal, do not be merciful upon him. And therefore, if someone was accused of inciting people to idolatry, and at first he was declared innocent, and then new information comes out that shows guilt, we bring him back to court and we say you are guilty. And furthermore, if he was declared guilty of guilty verdict, and then someone says, wait, I have an argument for innocence, we don't listen. We go and kill him, right? Even though there might be some argument that maybe he actually is innocent. No, we take no prisoners when it comes to idolatry. Rav Kahana matne meki harog tahargenu. Rav Kahana learns it from the pasuk that says, "You shall surely kill him." Harog tahargenu. Double language. So we learn extra language. Not only kill him if he's guilty, kill him. Not only kill him if he's guilty and then you find innocence, don't worry about it, don't ignore it. Even if he was found innocent and then you find reason for guilt, also bring him back to court. And that pasuk is said regarding an insider to idolatry. So to be zera, asked Rav Sheshat, how do you know that the law that we said, not the law of the insider, but the regular law of capital punishment, applies also to someone who killed by mistake and has to go to Ir Miklat and has to go into exile? How do you know that the same thing would be true if he was declared to be innocent, that he's not the killer at all, not even by mistake, and say he's allowed and set to go free? Even if new information comes out, we say, okay, we don't bring him back to court, he goes free. And on the opposite end, if he was declared to be guilty bishogeg, we know it was not on purpose, it was not premeditated, But still, right? You were somewhat negligent, and you have to go to Ir Miklat if they say that, and then new information comes and says maybe no, it wasn't really him. He didn't do anything at all. Then we do bring it back. So same as capital punishment. Atya roseach roseach in Bemidbar Lamed He. There's two pesukim there. One is talking about someone who kills bishogeg. One about bemezid, and both of them are called roseach. And so we make a gezerah shava and learn the same law. And not only capital punishment, but also for lashes. Same law. If someone was declared innocent regarding a case of lashes, like eating pig or something, and he's declared innocent, and then new information says, oh, really, he was guilty, we don't take new information, we let him go. And the opposite, if he was declared guilty, but we didn't give them lashes yet, and then information comes and says, no, he was really innocent, we open the case to get him off the hook. How do you know that that's true? Another gezerah shava of rasha. It says what rasha regarding someone who kills unintentionally, and also is rasha regarding someone who deserves lashes. Tanyana mehachi chayve galiot minayin atar roseach roseach chayve malkuyot minayin atya rasha. Abraita says the very same thing. How do you know we apply the same law to someone who kills bishogeg and would have to go to Ir Miklat because of the gezerah shava of roseach? And how do you know the same is true for someone who is accused of lashes because the gezerah shava of rasha? Ve'en machazirin lechova. Now, again, back to a capital case, we do not bring back the accused in the case of when he was declared innocent, and now we find information that he was guilty. Let's elaborate more on that. Amar Rabbi Chiya bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan v'hu sheta'a b'davar she'en hasadokin modin bo aval ta'a b'davar she'hasadokin modin bo zil kari be'Rav Hur. Rabbi Yochanan says an amazing law. When do we say that we don't reopen a capital case to find him guilty? Only if the judge made a mistake, not in a matter that the Sadducees would admit, but if it was something that the Sadducees would agree to, then that is such a simple matter that even children learn in school. Let's explain. The Sadducees was a Jewish group that was opposed to the rabbis, opposed to the Perushim, and later the rabbis. They did not believe in Torah Shebe'al Peh. They only had the Tanakh, and they read it in a literal sense. You can see that they read it in a literal sense from here, because the rabbis say anything that the Sadducees think is the law, in other words, their understanding of the Torah is the same as what kids learn in school. By the way, you might learn from here that kids in school learn the Peshat. First, when you're a kid, you learn the simple reading, and then after you master that, then you can learn the Midrash. So maybe this is a proof. In any case, the Sadducees just read the Torah plain, just like that, without Midrash, without the Torah Shebe'al Peh. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan is saying, if the judge made such a glaring error, he ignored a pasuk, a clear pasuk. Pasuk says, a mechalel Shabbat is chayav mita, a murderer, whatever. And he says, yes, yeah, you did that, you did this on Shabbat, but no capital punishment. Okay, this judge made such a simple mistake, even the Sadducees would say it's a mistake. In that case, we reopen it, and even though the judge at first said innocent, no, this judge, he didn't know what he was doing. He wasn't following the law at all. He wasn't even following a basic Torah explicit pasuk. Then we bring him back and say, no, you are guilty. This is quite an amazing thing, because we're deciding the rabbinic law based on the judgment call of what the Sadducees would say, which means the rabbis have to know enough about Sadducean law in order to decide whether this mistake is something that the Sadducees would say. But the point is that it's not so difficult to do. They're using the Sadducees as a stand-in for even a very simple, plain reading of a pasuk. So now Rabbi Chiya bar Abba asks Rabbi Yochanan, what would you say about a case of a judge who makes a mistake regarding an adulterer and an adulteress. This seems to be an explicit pasuk. But what if he, what mistake can you possibly make? But what if he does make a mistake? For example, let's say the judge thinks that only the adulterer, the man, deserves capital punishment, but the woman who committed adultery does not. And so he says, you're guilty of capital punishment, and tells the woman, you're not guilty of capital punishment. Now that's obviously wrong. Both of them, if they're willing, not a case of rape, but both if they're consensual, deserve capital punishment. So what would be a case of someone who could make a mistake in adultery that's not an explicit pasuk? In other areas of halacha, there's a lot of subtleties, but in this it seems to be black and white. Amar le adem mokadach yakid zil kos kadach usle. And Rabbi Yochanan answers him with an aphorism. While the fire is hot, cut the squash and roast it. Well, if you have a fire burning and you cook something else, while it's hot, go and cook the squash also. Meaning that I just gave you a principle, and so while you have that principle in mind, go and apply it. And it applies here as well. Indeed, if a judge makes a mistake in something so black and white as adultery, which is a clear-cut pasuk, then we would bring the case back. Even if the judge said that the woman is innocent, then you say, no, that's wrong. That's just a wrong reading of the Pesukim. Okay, bring that woman back. You committed adultery. Actually, I know the judge said you're innocent, but actually you're guilty. And so, right, we can use this principle to answer this question. And indeed, Rabbi Ameh said near Rabbi Yochanan explicitly that if a judge makes a mistake regarding adultery, we revoke the verdict, because these are simple black and white cases that if a judge would make a mistake, he's just going against an explicit pasuk. Okay, what would be a case where we would not overturn the verdict in the area of forbidden relations, right? What would be a case that is not explicit in the pasuk? For example, if a judge made a mistake regarding if someone committed adultery or forbidden relationships in the atypical manner, meaning not frontal but from the back. And so that is not explicit in the Pesukim. You wouldn't know that. We learn it from Mishkebe, plus as plural Mishkebe Isha. So we learn it from Eid Rasha that all forbidden relationships would be forbidden both in the regular way and in the irregular way. Since that is learned from Edir HaShah, it's not something that the Sadducees would agree to. The Sadducees may very well say that only regular intercourse is prohibited, but not irregular. And so, if a judge made a mistake in that, it is a mistake, but since it's not an explicit pasuk, that is a mistake that we would that if the judge said, you're innocent because of that, and he is capital case, and he said you're innocent, and then we realized he made a mistake. No, since he declared innocent in a capital case, that's where we would apply the normal rule that no double jeopardy, and we would not call the person back to say, no, you're actually, I'm guilty. No, once he's innocent, he's innocent. But if it was a mistake like he thinks, the judge thinks the man is guilty, but the woman that he sinned with is not guilty, then that would be a clear-cut case of a mistake against the pasuk, and we would call the person back and say, sorry, I know I said you were innocent, but actually you are guilty because it's against a clear pasuk. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.